In 1866, a Texas rancher named Charles Goodnight took a worn-out Army surplus wagon, bolted a heavy pantry box onto the back of it, and changed the way an entire industry ate. He called it a chuck wagon. It rolled out that same year on the Goodnight-Loving Trail, carrying cattle north out of Texas toward railheads that didn't even exist yet on any map most Americans could name. Within a few short years, nearly every serious cattle outfit in the country had copied his design almost exactly, right down to the hinged pantry door that folded flat into a makeshift table. But the food that came out of that wagon looked nothing like the campfire grub you're picturing right now. Because right alongside the beans and the biscuits everybody already knows about, that same wagon fed grown men a stewed section of a calf's stomach lining, a butter substitute made from bacon grease and molasses, and a dessert named after a part of a bull that nobody says out loud on camera. This wasn't rustic charm cooked up for a postcard. This was survival cooking, built by a man called Cookie, who worked longer hours than every single cowboy on the drive combined, and who was, without question or debate, the most important man in camp, ranch owner and trail boss included. Cross him, and you'd be eating cold beans for a week straight. Stay on his good side, and you might just get the good stuff before anybody else in line even smelled it cooking. A single cattle drive in this era could move 2,000 or 3,000 head at once, worth more money at the railhead than most of these young riders would see in a lifetime of any other work available to them. And yet the men actually pushing those cattle north, risking drowning, stampedes, and raiding parties along the way, were paid barely enough to matter, fed almost entirely out of one wagon, and remembered by history mostly as a silhouette on a horse rather than as the individual, hungry, exhausted men they actually were. Every single night, before he finally rolled into his own bedroll, Cookie had one last job left to do. He'd walk out to the front of the wagon and point the tongue of it due north. That was it. No compass needed after that. Come morning, before a single word got spoken, the whole outfit already knew exactly which direction the herd was moving that day, just by glancing at which way that wagon pointed. It's a small thing, barely worth a sentence in most history books. But it tells you everything about how this whole operation actually ran. Quiet competence, no wasted motion, and a cook who carried an entire camp on his back without ever once being asked to. Let's start at the top of the list. And Cookie, wherever you are, this one's for you. But first, it's worth sitting with just how dangerous this whole enterprise actually was. The Goodnight-Loving Trail alone stretched more than 2,000 miles from central Texas up through New Mexico and into Colorado and Wyoming, crossing rivers that could rise 10 feet overnight, deserts that could go 80 miles without a single reliable water source, and territory that swallowed up entire herds without a trace. Cowboys on these drives were mostly young men, often still in their teens or barely past them, earning $1 a day for work that could kill them without warning. The chuck wagon wasn't a luxury bolted onto that danger. It was the one piece of the whole operation built entirely around keeping those young men alive and functional through it, and the food it produced, strange as some of it sounds to us now, was engineered specifically for that job and nothing else. Number 25 is Charlie Taylor. When butter ran out on the trail, which happened constantly given there was no cow's milk to spare and no ice anywhere to keep it fresh anyway, the cook mixed molasses straight into bacon grease and called the result Charlie Taylor. It spread easy on a hot biscuit, and it did the job well enough that nobody complained too loudly about the substitution. Nobody alive today seems to know who the real Charlie Taylor actually was, or why his name got stuck permanently to a bacon grease spread, but the name outlived every possible explanation for it, the same way plenty of camp jokes tend to outlive their own punchline by a full century or more, long after anyone remembers what was so funny in the first place. My own father used to say a man's cooking tells you more about where he came from than his name ever will, and I think about that every time I hear a strange old dish like this one. Number 24 is fried chicken. This is where cowboy humor gets a little sneaky on you. Fried chicken, on a cattle drive, usually meant nothing more than strips of bacon rolled in flour and fried crisp in a skillet. There was no actual chicken anywhere near it, not within 100 miles most weeks, and everybody sitting around that fire knew it full well. It just sounded a whole lot better on a hungry man's ear after 14 hours in the saddle than the plain truth ever would have, and calling it by a fancier name cost the cook absolutely nothing. Out here, a good joke was worth almost as much as a good meal, and most nights, a cook who could deliver both at once was worth following clear across 3 states. Number 23 is Chuck Wagon Chicken. Same joke, plainer delivery, less imagination behind it. This one was just fried bacon, no flour dredge, no pretense whatsoever, and certainly no chicken anywhere in the skillet. If Cookie happened to be in a mood for embellishment that particular morning, you got fried chicken on the fire. If he wasn't feeling especially generous with the truth that day, you got Chuck Wagon Chicken instead, plain and unapologetic, and either way you learned fast not to ask too many questions before you started eating your share. Some crews swore they could tell which mood the cook was in just from the smell drifting off the skillet before a single word got said that morning. Number 22 is hard cheese dipped in paraffin wax. Refrigeration didn't exist anywhere out on the open range, so a cook looking to keep a wheel of cheese edible for months at a stretch would dip the whole thing in melted wax, sealing it up completely airtight against the heat, the flies, and the dust, kicked up by 1,000 head of cattle moving across dry ground. You'd carve a ring of wax off the outside before slicing into it, and the cheese underneath held up remarkably well for the better part of a whole season on the trail. Actually, this exact method is still used by some specialty cheesemakers today, though they call it artisanal now instead of desperate, which tells you something about how taste and necessity have a way of trading places over enough time. A cook who could stretch one good wheel of cheese across 3 months of hard travel was worth every bit as much to an outfit as the best rider on the crew, even if nobody ever put it quite that plainly to his face. Number 21 is marrow gut stew, and this might be the single strangest dish on this entire list. Marrow gut is the connecting tube between the stomach chambers of an unweaned calf, and one old half-mythical recipe passed down among cooks called for it to simmer for a staggering 304 hours straight without ever stopping. Most cooks, understandably, settled for about half a day instead, adding salt, pepper, and onion until the whole pot turned rich, dark, and completely unrecognizable from where it started that morning. It sounds impossible to actually sit down and eat with a straight face. It wasn't. It was just honest food, born from a simple rule that nothing on that calf was ever allowed to go into the ground, no matter how strange the part or how squeamish the man holding the spoon. Number 20 is son-of-a-gun stew, the fancier cousin of marrow gut, built from heart, liver, and tripe, simmered low and slow with whatever root vegetable happened to be left in the wagon that particular week of the drive. The name itself was a polite substitute for a much cruder phrase cowboys actually used around the fire, cleaned up just enough to be printable in a newspaper and just enough to say out loud around any decent company that happened to wander through camp unannounced looking for supper. Cooks took real pride in this one, since turning organ meat into something men actually asked for, seconds of, took real skill, not just necessity. The nickname Cookie itself wasn't handed out lightly either. A cook earned that name through years of proving he could keep a crew fed, healthy, and reasonably content under conditions that would have broken most men within a week. Some outfits paid their cook more than they paid their trail boss on the simple theory that a bad cook could end a cattle drive faster than bad weather, bad luck, or a bad stretch of river ever could. Hungry men make poor decisions in the saddle, and a good outfit understood that long before anybody wrote it down as any kind of official policy. But that's not even the strangest thing sitting on this list tonight, because the next dish isn't even a stew at all. It's a full fried meal, and it's exactly what it sounds like, no matter how many times you reread that name. Number 19 is calf fries, also known across the West as Rocky Mountain oysters. Yes, they're exactly what you think they are. Sliced thin, dredged in seasoned flour, and fried crisp in hot fat, they were considered a genuine delicacy at branding time specifically, when there happened to be a whole lot of them on hand all at once, and nothing about wasting them made any sense at all to a practical cook. More than a few skeptical riders admitted, usually after the fact and usually a little sheepishly, that they tasted a whole lot better than they ever sounded on paper, tender inside with a crunch that surprised almost everybody who tried one for the first time at the branding fire, curiosity usually winning out over hesitation by the second bite, and pride keeping most men from ever admitting they'd hesitated at all. Number 18 is Son of a Gun in a Sack, dough and dried fruit, tied up together tight inside a cloth sack, then lowered straight into a pot of boiling water until the whole bundle steamed into something between a pudding and a dense dumpling, warm and heavy in the hand once it finally came out. It's an old trick, older than the chuck wagon itself by a long stretch, brought west by cooks who'd first learned it from sailors and soldiers long before any of them ever laid eyes on open-range grass or a single head of cattle, proof that good ideas travel a lot farther than the people who first thought of them. A cook without a proper oven could still manage dessert this way, which mattered more than it sounds on a trail where an actual baked good could go weeks between appearances. Number 17 is calf slobbers, which, despite the name, is simply meringue, piled thick and golden-tipped on top of a pie fresh out of the Dutch oven. Nobody's entirely sure why Cowboys decided to name a delicate, sweet, egg-white topping after cattle drool, but if you'd spent all day elbow-deep in actual calf slobber during branding season, wrestling animals twice your size in the dirt, maybe the joke just writes itself by the time supper finally rolls around, and a name like that stuck a lot harder than any fancier one ever could have, passed from crew to crew, until nobody could even say who coined it first. Number 16 is boggy top pie, a dried apple pie with no top crust at all, just an open, bubbling layer of fruit exposed straight to the Dutch oven's heat until it turned dark and syrupy at the edges. Skipping the top crust wasn't laziness on the cook's part, and nobody ever accused him of cutting a corner over it. It saved flour, and flour out on the trail was worth more, some weeks, than most men's actual wages, so a cook who could stretch a sack of it a little further earned real respect around the whole camp, no questions asked and no apology needed, and a reputation that followed him from outfit to outfit for years afterward. Number 15 is sheep sorrel pie. Sheep sorrel is a wild, lemony-tasting green that grew right along the trail itself, tucked in low patches near creek beds and shaded fence lines, and it was about the only source of real greenery a cowboy got for weeks at a stretch. Cooks foraged it by its distinctive arrowhead-shaped leaf and folded it into a pie that tasted sharp, sour, and completely unlike anything else on that week's menu. A welcome jolt after so much salt and smoke, and a small reminder that even the driest stretch of trail still had something growing on it. Branding season, in particular, changed the whole rhythm of camp. Instead of moving 12 or 15 miles a day behind a slow-walking herd, the outfit stayed put for days at a time, wrestling calves, working irons hot off the fire, and generating exactly the kind of odd, plentiful byproducts that dishes like calf fries and calf slobbers were built around in the first place. It was hard, dirty, dangerous work, closer to a controlled brawl than anything resembling a modern ranch chore, and the food that came out of it reflected that same rough, improvised energy right down to the name on the plate. We're right at the halfway mark now, and here's where the story turns from strange to simply resourceful. Remember Oliver Loving, the second name on that trail we opened with tonight? In 1867, Loving was badly wounded by a Comanche raiding party while riding ahead of the herd to scout water. He held on for weeks before the wound finally took him, and Charles Goodnight, his partner and friend, made him a promise before he died: that his body would go home to Texas soil, not stay buried out on the open range. Goodnight kept that promise, hauling Loving's casket more than 600 miles back across the very trail they'd built together. That's the kind of loyalty this whole operation ran on, long before any of these dishes ever hit a plate, and it's worth remembering every time you hear that trail's name mentioned. Number 14 is Spotted Pup, a rice pudding studded clean through with raisins, simmered slow in milk and sugar until it turned soft, sweet, and speckled all the way through like its name suggested. It was one of the few desserts that showed up regularly enough for cowboys to actually expect it now and then, rather than treat it like some kind of miracle from the pantry box, and a good batch could disappear from the pot in minutes flat, spoon after spoon, long before the fire even burned down, leaving nothing behind but a scraped clean pot and a few satisfied groans. Number 13 is calico beans, made simply by throwing several different varieties of bean into the very same pot, so the finished dish came out mottled and multicolored, not unlike the coat of a calico cat wandering around the corral at dusk. It was less a proper recipe than it was an honest description of whatever happened to be left over in the bean sacks that particular week of the drive, and no two pots ever came out looking quite the same twice, which somehow never once stopped anybody from finishing the whole thing down to the last spoonful scraped off the bottom. Number 12 is canned peaches, known out on the trail as airtights. Canned goods were heavy to haul, expensive to buy, and genuinely rare out on the open range, so a single can of peaches wasn't just dessert to a tired crew. It was the closest thing to a holiday a cowboy got all season, and opening one was treated with something close to real ceremony around the fire, passed hand to hand until every last dripping slice was gone, syrup and all, straight from the tin. Weather decided most of what a crew actually ate on any given week, far more than preference ever did. A sudden hailstorm could scatter a herd for miles and cost the outfit an entire day of hard riding just to gather it back up, which meant a cook improvising supper in the dark, half-soaked himself, working by lantern light instead of daylight. A dry stretch could mean rationing water for both men and horses, coffee brewed thin to stretch what little there was. The dishes on this list weren't chosen, they were dictated, meal by meal, by whatever the sky and the ground decided to hand over that particular day. Number 11 is canned tomatoes, prized for two completely different reasons at once. They tasted sweet and bright against all that heavily salted meat, and the acid in them helped cut the gypsum taste right out of river water most cowboys were drinking straight, untreated, and without much choice in the matter most days out on the open range. A cowboy who'd gone weeks without anything fresh would practically fight over the last spoonful left in the can, and more than one cook learned to portion it out carefully before a fight over the last can broke out for real. Number 10 is gravy-soaked hardtack. Hardtack on its own could genuinely break a tooth if you weren't careful biting into it straight, hard enough that soldiers a generation earlier had nicknamed it worse things than that. So cooks broke it down further, simmering the broken pieces in milk and leftover pan drippings until it finally softened into something almost resembling actual comfort food. It was hardtack's only real path toward being enjoyable, and cooks took full advantage of that fact whenever they had the time to spare for it, turning a punishment of a biscuit into something closer to a treat, and proving once again that patience was the one ingredient no chuck wagon ever ran short of. Number 9 is red-eye gravy, made by deglazing the very same skillet that just finished frying bacon, using strong black coffee instead of water or wine to loosen everything stuck to the bottom of the pan. The reddish color that comes off the pan gives the dish its name, and it turned a plain skillet of leftover drippings into something a cowboy would ride hard all morning just to get back to by lunchtime, biscuit already in hand, ready to sop up every last streak of it. The wagon itself ran on rules just as strict as anything written into law back east. Nobody ran a horse near the wagon, out of respect for the cook's space and his nerves both. You always rode downwind of it when you could help it. If you spotted decent firewood on the trail, you brought it back with you without being asked twice. And strangers passing through, whoever they were, wherever they came from, were always welcome at the fire. No questions required before a plate got handed over. It wasn't written down anywhere official. It didn't need to be. We're closing in on the end of this list now, and here's where the food stops being about pure survival and starts being about the rhythm of the whole outfit instead. It's worth pausing here to say plainly, the cook wasn't just a cook. He was, by every account handed down from the era, the banker who held a man's wages until town, the barber who cut hair on a Sunday, the dentist who'd pull a rotten tooth with a pair of pliers if it came to that, and the closest thing to a doctor most cowboys would see for weeks at a time. All of that, on top of 3 hot meals a day, cooked from a wagon bouncing over rutted ground, for a crew of men who could be difficult, exhausted, and occasionally furious with him for reasons that had nothing to do with the food at all. And still, night after night, he fed them. Number 8 is wild game bird stew. When a cowboy's rifle happened to find a prairie chicken or a quail somewhere along the trail, it went straight into the pot with potatoes and whatever herb the cook still had left on hand that week. It broke up the endless monotony of beef and salt pork, and honestly, a lot of riders looked forward to it more than they'd ever fully admit out loud to each other around the fire at night, quietly hoping the next shot would find one too, and quietly volunteering for scouting duty a little more eagerly on the days a good bird stew felt overdue. Number 7 is sourdough starter loaf bread. The cook's sourdough starter was treated almost like a living member of the outfit, fed and tended daily without fail, sometimes even carried closer to the body in cold weather than the cook's own bedroll ever was, wrapped snug against the chill so it wouldn't die overnight on him. A good starter could survive years out on the trail, passed carefully from cook to cook, wagon to wagon, long after the men who first fed it had already moved on or passed away themselves, a kind of quiet inheritance nobody ever wrote down in a will. Some old-timers claimed a truly ancient starter could be traced back decades, wagon to wagon, outfit to outfit, all the way to some forgotten cook nobody could even put a name to anymore, which made losing one to spoilage or neglect feel less like a kitchen mishap and more like an actual death in the family. Number 6 is pan de campo, a simple skillet camp bread brought north by vaquero cooks, working these same cattle trails long before American cowboys ever picked up the tradition for themselves. It required nothing more than flour, water, and a good hot skillet, and it fed just as many hungry men, meal after meal, as any sourdough biscuit ever managed to, proof that the best trail food usually traveled north and mixed together long before anybody bothered writing the recipe down. American cowboy cooking, in other words, was never quite as purely American as the postcards like to make it look. Vaqueros had been driving cattle across this same stretch of country for generations before the word cowboy even entered common use, and an honest accounting of chuck wagon food has to give that history its due rather than pretending it started fresh in 1866 with one wagon and one Texas rancher. Number 5 is so belly and onions. So belly, the trail name for plain salt-cured pork fat, needed almost nothing done to it besides a hot skillet and one sliced onion, and it became one of the single most reliable meats across the entire cattle drive, week after week, month after month, drive after drive, year after year, without a single cowboy ever growing tired of asking for more of it. Reliability out on that trail was worth more to a hungry man than almost anything a fancier kitchen could have offered him instead. Underneath the wagon itself hung a rawhide sling called the possum belly, stretched tight between the axles to carry firewood and dried buffalo chips for the next night's fire. It swayed with every rut in the trail, and cooks learned to load it heavy in country where fuel was scarce, since a possum belly that ran empty by sundown meant a cold supper, and a cold supper on a hard day was about the closest thing to a genuine crisis this outfit ever faced that didn't involve the cattle themselves. Number 4 is corn dodgers, small fried ovals made from cornmeal, lard, and hot water, tough enough to survive a full day inside a saddlebag without falling apart into crumbs by sundown. They weren't exciting, not by any stretch of the word. They were dependable, and out on that trail, dependable counted for a whole lot more than exciting ever really could to a man who'd been riding since before sunrise that morning, half asleep in the saddle and grateful for anything solid in his pocket, no matter how plain it looked sitting there. Number 3 is molasses cookies, sweetened with molasses instead of the sugar most outfits simply couldn't spare, spiced with whatever cinnamon or ginger happened to be sitting in the pantry box that particular month of the drive. They traveled well, stayed soft for days at a stretch, and gave tired, saddle-sore men a small, quiet reason to smile at the end of a long one, tucked away in a shirt pocket for later in the day, half forgotten until a hand brushed against it hours later. Number 2 is dried peach cobbler, baked low in a Dutch oven whenever the cook was in a good enough mood and had a little extra time before the herd needed moving again that afternoon. It was rare enough to feel like a genuine event every single time it appeared on the fire, and outfits lucky enough to land a good cook were the envy of every other crew working that same trail that season, cobbler or no cobbler, bragging rights included at no extra charge. Word of a particularly good cook's cobbler could travel faster down a cattle trail than most actual news, passed rider to rider at water stops and river crossings until every outfit within 100 miles knew exactly whose wagon to angle toward if they ever got the chance. And number one, the dish that closes out this whole list isn't really a dish at all. It's Cowboy coffee and the unwritten rule that came riding along right beside it. If you were pouring yourself a fresh cup and another rider called out, "Man at the pot," you were obligated, no exceptions allowed, to fill his cup too before you took a single sip of your own. It didn't matter how tired you were, or how far you'd already ridden that particular day, or how badly you wanted that first hot swallow for yourself before anybody else got one. That coffee pot, sitting black and battered over the coals every single morning of the drive, was the one constant thread running clean through the whole cattle operation, and the rule built up around it was as close to actual law as anything ever got out on the open range. It didn't matter if you were the trail boss or the youngest hand on the crew. Man at the pot meant man at the pot, and every single rider understood exactly what that meant, without a single word of explanation ever needing to be said out loud. That's the thing about every single dish on this list tonight. None of it was fancy. None of it came easy. But every one of these 25 dishes came out of a cook who worked before the sun rose and long after it finally set, feeding a crew of men who trusted him with more than just their next meal, more than they probably trusted most anybody else on that entire drive. That tradition never actually disappeared either. To this day, there are chuck wagon cooking associations across Texas, Oklahoma, and Kansas that hold competitions every single year, judging cooks on biscuits, beans, and meat, cooked exactly the way it would have been done 150 years ago, over the same kind of open fire, out of the same kind of wagon. Grown men and women still compete fiercely over whose sourdough starter runs deepest, whose Dutch oven cobbler comes out just right, whose coffee gets poured strong enough to wake a tired crew before sunrise. It's not nostalgia dressed up as sport. It's a genuine, living thread back to Cookie and every cook like him, still being pulled taut by people who refuse to let it go slack. The wagon tongue still points north somewhere out there tonight, even if there's nobody left to follow it anymore. And somewhere, on a cold morning at the edge of some old half-forgotten cattle trail, I'd like to think there's still a pot of coffee sitting on the fire, and somebody, somewhere, still yelling out for the man at the pot, and somebody else, without a single complaint, already reaching for that pot to fill a stranger's cup before his own. We just spent time around Cookie's fire, learning what a cattle drive ate when the whole outfit sat down together at breakfast and supper. But there were 2 meals a day Cowboys never got to eat sitting down at all. Out on the trail, the noon meal wasn't cooked, wasn't shared, and wasn't hot. It was whatever a rider could grab from his own saddlebag and eat one-handed while the herd kept moving underneath him. This is that meal.